honored to be here finally, kind of organization I've been looking at from across the ocean for quite some time. Never had a chance to actually visit it, so wonderful opportunity. I think quite daring also of you to, in your series of architects talking about collaborations, to pick me, because some people consider me to be the anti-architect. So I'm not trained as a designer. I spend a lot of time with designers currently in Cambridge, just across the border, at the GSD. My partner is actually an architect, so I know a little bit about it, but I'm also very critical, but you will learn more about that in this presentation. Before I start, I think thinking about friendships, I made a new friend this year who actually lives with me, who is from this country, and I will tell more about her later on, and she also described it in a very funny way, I think. You will see America, but then without the Americans. I've been pleasantly surprised that it's much more than that, it seems. But she recently discovered, she's from Vancouver, I will tell more about her biography later on, but she recently discovered that she has indigenous roots. And she has also been telling me about a practice you have here in Canada, that at the beginning of each public address, you acknowledge the fact that other people lived here before us or are still living here that have a certain claim over the land. So I would try to do that here. I will read it. She sent me a message because I think for me it's important. It says something about what I'm interested in at the moment, and maybe it tells us also something about how we can define friendship or redefine friendship. So bear with me, I will read it out. So I want to acknowledge that the CCA is located on land which has long served as a site of meeting and exchange amongst indigenous people, including the, and help me please, the Haudenosaunee and the Anishinabeg, and if I'm correct, also the Kenyan Keahaka. Probably awful, but still. I honor, recognize, and respect these nations as the traditional stewards of the lands and the waters on which we meet today, and pay respect to their elders, past and present. And then she continues, in between brackets, it's also good to add a personal statement, such as, I come from a colonizing nation, namely the Netherlands, and I accept the damage we did to the nations and cultures we colonized, and the wealth we derived from it, on a journey to understand how best to repair the damage done by my ancestors. I'm really happy with this expression of friendship, I think, because she put words in my mouth that give me a better self-understanding and that allow me to be self-critical. And although it might sound funny how I bring it here, I'm really sincere about what I had to say. I do think it's important, being from a country that has created its own land, and but at the expense of the land of others that we stole from them. So I think it's good to acknowledge that. So just one example of how friendship keeps shaping me. So welcome to my invisible friend here in front of me. Glad you could join us here. There will be several friends joining us here today. One of them actually couldn't make it into the room. He or she is too big. So maybe on the way out we get a chance to meet them. So let me start with this image. So I want to talk a bit about where I come from. I want to take you on a journey, tell you a bit about how I spent my last year, who I met, who I consider to be my friends, who are clearly not my friends, and maybe along the way hope to also engage in a conversation with you if there is time. But let me start in my hometown, Amsterdam. And I'm bringing you, and I know there's another Dutch person in the room, I think we tend to agree on that, at least for a long time, this was seen as the ugliest street of Amsterdam. One of the few modern arteries that kind of cut through the old fabric of the city. It's called the Wieboudstraat, named after a deputy mayor who was responsible for social housing in the 20s. But really an hinterland, the backside of the city, where breweries were situated, where the poor people were put in social housing, and also a place where, for a long time, some of the largest Dutch newspapers were printed. So this is the printing press. The ground floor had all the machines, and on top of that, there were the offices for the editors of those newspapers. One of those newspapers, it still exists, it's called Trouw, which means something like trust, faithful, but you could also interpret it as, or it's also part of trouwen, which is a verb which means to get married. So it has all these connotations that are about a close relationship and trust and faithfulness. And it comes from the Second World War, when this newspaper was introduced as a resistance newspaper, and it has been around ever since. They moved to another building just outside of the city with their printing plant, and they left behind this incredible structure, which used to be used in this way. So it was built for machines, since I can imagine there are quite some architecture fans or experts in the room. The architects were Van den Broek and Bakema, let's say the OMA of their time, one of the biggest offices in the Netherlands, but also part of Team 10 and internationally active. This is quite a rare building because it's only for machines. But the machines were removed, and this is how we, and now I'm getting into the first friendship in which I kind of stumbled around 10 years ago. We as a group of people, DJs, music producers, party organizers, cultural entrepreneurs, architects, artists, were kind of hanging out together around 2009, 2008. Some of them were already involved in a big nightclub, which was called 11, that had to close down, and they were kind of searching for a new spot. And they landed here, and they asked me and my friend Yua to join them, to think of this space as a potential art institute of the future. Like this hybrid space that incorporates dancing, eating, having fun, but also with a serious twist, a venue where you can go watch movies, where you can see exhibitions, where there are debates happening, maybe inspired by Centre Pompidou or Palais de Tokyo, for those of you who are familiar with those, or the ICA. And we didn't have that, so we were totally enthusiastic. So we joined them right from the beginning. So that was the birth of Trouw, the nightclub, named after the newspaper, and then the cultural branch of that, or the side program called the Verdieping, which literally translates into the deepening, as in deepening your understanding of something. And it is a name we took from the newspaper because it was a daily supplement to the paper that talked about philosophical issues or religious matters or current affairs. So it was giving a deeper understanding of yourself and of the world you live in. So we thought that was appropriate. So Trouw is more the activist approach of the resistance movement, and then the deepening as a way to kind of get under that and explore new layers. Quite quickly, this became a phenomenon. By far, I dare to say, the most popular night venue in Amsterdam and its surroundings, which was incredible. And for a large part, that was because of this invisible friend who I invited here and who you unfortunately cannot see. And I just want to show a short clip where you see him in action. I will say his name, it's Olaf Boswijk, but I won't be showing him for now. Maybe later on he will join us in this presentation. When you see him behind the decks hugging someone, I think that was really his role. He was bringing the people together. He was at the center of this incredible adventure. He was with a few partners, so business partners, but also creative partners, and they all had their specific task, but he was the person who was kind of tying it together. He also did the music programming for the main space, and he was also one of the resident DJs, so he also performed. So in a way, he created the perfect conditions for his own parties, in a way, which I find, and I will mention a few more things that I learned from him and that I really admire in him, that he was able to not only create the physical conditions but also the atmosphere and to bring these people together, and they all added up to this magical place and this magical moment in time, I believe. So here you see me standing, holding up this, what is in reality the business plan of the club. So it was printed on a single paper as a poster, and it was almost like a call to action. So we started off in the middle of the crisis, right? 2008, 2009, there was no money. There we were with this massive abandoned building. So what we did was embracing the crisis and to just trust in that the crash will create new opportunities and also help us rethink some of the preconceived notions we had about what it is to go out at night, or what it is to be creative in a city, or what it is to, as a community, help build a city. So we really tapped into the mood of the times where people were kind of coming together, eager to look for a new future, look for new ways how you could engage with one another. So you and I, we started working on the program, and one of the first things we did together with Olaf is organizing parties. So this is in the basement of the club. These speakers were brought in from the previous venue. There were some beer crates, and that was it. But the room was packed, it was exciting, there was a buzz around the place, and people showed up en masse. So we had huge lines. Not all the times, obviously. There were evenings that were more obscure, or, I mean, we have your kind of weather, so people would stay away on certain nights. But overall, I think we managed to create a place that was missing from the scene in Amsterdam. And that in a weird way combined large scale with intimacy. And I think, again, that's when you have someone like Olaf who embodies this spirit and who is continuously present, and he welcomes you, and he's even the DJ playing the music for you. I think that is such a powerful gesture. And if you would compare that to architecture, where I won't be bashing architects or architecture tonight, but just for the sake of argument, that architects show up at the opening, or the really good ones might come back anonymously, but to be there, present, and be responsible for a place that you helped to create, I think that's something praiseworthy. And that's what he did. And another thing I really learned from him is how through very minimum means you can turn banal, generic architecture into this kind of magical cathedral for the 21st century, just by having light. I do want to mention Michiel van Iersel, who was the resident light designer of Trouw. Another thing that the team came up with, and Olaf was very important in helping us understand that it's about loyalty. You work with people from the beginning till the end. So the crew who started at the beginning was basically the crew who also ended because it will end, unfortunately. So with just with these very simplistic means, they created this kind of environment where the architecture was kind of dissolving. You were floating in light. You were floating in sounds. The sound waves would pick you up. I guess all of you have been to clubs, but this was something else. This was really, really special. At the same time, you could also have dinner there. So it's not only about this bodily experience of immersing yourself in light and sound, but it was also about creating the conditions where people actually can sit and come together and have conversations. And again, Olaf and all the rest of the team would have dinner with people. When we had guests, we would have dinner in the restaurant. So again, kind of scaling up your own kitchen in a way and bringing it to this place and combining it with other things that you care about. So down in the basement, we started organizing small exhibitions. And again, Olaf and later on Kim Tuin, their ability to be generous, to be open, to be investigative, to be genuinely interested in new forms and not have any preconceived notion on what quality means, which is radically different from a lot of the other art venues there are out there. We slowly became more professional. We started working with the Stedelijk Museum, which is our national modern art museum in Amsterdam, organizing exhibitions with them. And then, as we built up momentum and more people started coming, the question rose, what is going to happen to this building? Because I think it's good to point out that it was actually slated for demolition. So we were actually sitting on some sort of time bomb. So we were having a wonderful time, but the volcano was about to erupt and it was going to implode. And we didn't know exactly when that would happen, but in a few years for sure. So we started thinking, why? We're having such a great time. The building was abandoned, it found a new purpose, and here we are willing to commit our lives, bring in our friendships, and rehabilitate this space. But still, the demolition permit was there. So we actually turned that into a question and a series of public talks that were called failed architecture. So this is the origin of a project that is very dear to me, and I will talk about it a bit more. So we sat down and we just posed this question: why is this building going to be demolished, and who decides on that? Are there any alternatives? So we would bring in architects, city planners, the owner of the building, and we would have fierce discussions around some of these questions. And then we would show movies with people like Rem Koolhaas giving either a good or a bad example of how you can deal with space. So looking for the tension in between the planned environment and the lived environment. And we, I think, were an exponent of the latter, where we were living the space instead of kind of conceptualizing it. So this also would scale up, so everything started very small, then we would scale it up. So we would literally move to the ground floor and we would have this vast dance floor where we would bring people together. At a certain point we would have 200-300 people showing up to engage in a discussion about failed architecture. And we got some funding and we managed to invite people from abroad to come and speak at these events. And again, Olaf was there, present, welcoming people, providing this space for conflict and tension and productive discourse. We did workshops where we looked at the building, at the street, so also using it as some sort of hub to venture out and explore a larger part of the city. And then the day came when we heard, when we had to leave, and the building eventually, let's say, wasn't entirely demolished, but I'll show you an image of what it looks like now. And around the time, the mayor actually, the late mayor, he passed away unfortunately last year, he came to play some records, but also to give Trouw a 24-hour license, so we could party till we dropped. And that's what we did. And especially towards the end of it, for days without end, people would stay inside and we just celebrate the eventual downfall of that place. And it was just pure energy. And And it has been a while since I've been in these conditions, but I can tell it gives me the goosebumps. And I don't know about you, but just this, so the building wasn't meant for human beings, but in a weird way it was perfect because it was so well insulated, because it had to keep the sound of the machines inside, right? So as a nightclub, it was perfect. So it really lifted you up, and it was so solid and strong that it kind of kept you afloat. It was incredible. So in that final phase, a few other ideas were conceived by Olaf and his team to kind of create or to enforce this idea of loyalty. So they came up with a wedding ring that they would hand out to people like frequent guests or people they would like to see come back to the trouw. And we started working with some artists. So this is a project by Rayan Tabet from Lebanon, from Beirut, who reintroduced the original newspaper, which talks about, so some of the people who worked for the newspaper during the Second World War were actually executed because the Nazis had found out about this underground newspaper, and they were executed. And next day they printed the paper saying, loyal till death do us part. So that was written big on as a heading of the newspaper. So he used that and he kind of reintroduced the newspaper, had it reprinted, but also used this till death do us part and put it inside of the building as almost a farewell to the building, but also an encouragement to us as a community to maybe stick together. So it was eventually put on the facade of the building while people were lining up to get in for those final moments. And then it ended. That was it. Here you see the Last Supper with Olaf in the middle. So we moved out. We all went in different directions. Honestly, I haven't really seen him ever since. But I think he has had a huge impact on me on so many levels and in so many ways. And only now, spending a year at Harvard, where I have time to think and reflect and talk to people, and I got in touch with him again, and we spent time talking to each other, thinking back of those wonderful moments. Yeah, but life goes on for the building and for us. So about the building, this is what happened to that. It was turned into a hotel called the Student Hotel. So you can get a student room for anything between 1,000 and 1,400 euros a month, which according to our standards is a lot of money, right? So imagine the kind of people it attracts. This is the interior. And to contrast that with trouw, and I think what we try to achieve there. And I think partly because of that, it increased the value of the property and it made it desirable for the developer. And he initially wanted to tap into that. He wanted to kind of extend it, but I don't know about you, but I think he completely lost it and completely detached the new concept from what we try to do in there. So what remains is a wonderful book. If you're interested, let me know. I might be able to get hold of a copy, in which many of us have contributed by writing articles or sharing memories. There were wonderful photos in there. Another important thing for me personally, what remains, is Failed Architecture as an independent organization that grew out of this, of these few exciting years, and we really managed to solidify it and we turn it into a non-profit. So we have a board. We managed to get some funding, but it really started there, just being in that space and listening to the space and working with someone like Olaf, who has such a different take on spatial quality. So the website is still there for those of you who don't know it. For the past 6 or 7 years, we've been publishing articles around all kinds of issues that kind of shed light on the dark side of architecture. And that's really broad, but still very urgent, I think, and very necessary. So luckily we have a big following, many contributors from around the world, please do feel invited to contribute. If you have any thought on an article you want to write. Interestingly enough, we have no piece on Montreal right now, so that might be something. We talk about real estate, so again, going back to Trouw, Olaf dealing with the developer, with the banks, you know, finding the money to invest in the place, it all kind of was instrumental in how failed architecture shaped. So the issues that we had to deal with ourselves personally at Trouw kind of fed into the platform and are still the topics: gentrification, segregation, all of those issues are tackled by some of the contributors. And we recently started a podcast, and one of the podcasts talks about the importance of pop culture and kind of reimagining the promise of modernism. And in a lot of videos by, for example, rap artists, you see architecture deliberately being used as a backdrop to kind of identify themselves and also to say, stay off my turf, right? This is my spot. Kind of making the claim to the land in a way. And again, this goes back to Trouw for me personally, like being in this environment where music was key, was crucial, was central to the whole experience, and bringing in DJs from around the world, partnering with a place like Berghain in Berlin, this legendary nightclub, which is also like this hybrid of music and art and all kind of coming together in space, in a structure. So the relationship music, pop culture, street culture in particular, and architecture is one of those red threads that keeps coming back, and is also partly the reason why we were invited to contribute to an exhibition which talks about who owns the city. So about how can I appropriate a city of which I'm not part of, or where the powers that be don't give me access to the resources. So we were asked to contribute with an installation. The curator, another amazing friend of mine, Amal Al-Haq, a curator, thinker, writer, traveler, connector, based in Amsterdam, originally from Somalia. She curated the show and she brought an amazing bunch of people together. And we had sessions talking about these issues where for example, Nonne de Rue, which is a very successful architect based in Rotterdam, building all around the Netherlands and increasingly international, he came to join us for a conversation about accessibility and affordability. So again, learning from Olaf and Trouw, how can you create those conditions where people can be generous and can be frank and be patient with one another and feel encouraged to speak out and to be open. So we made one contribution. We made a video, like a 2-channel video, where we juxtaposed video clips. Like we spent weeks, Charlie Clemens and Tom Carter and I, going through YouTube, like watching night after night videos from our childhood up to the present day of how musicians kind of use architecture to position themselves within the city. So we paired that with these sleek CGI fly-through renderings of modernist structures. So the Farnsworth House or the Neue Nationalgalerie, and also contemporary buildings, just to juxtapose like this imaginary dream world of the architect and the planner and the developer, and this picture-perfect isolated structure, almost like a sculpture put in space, versus the rough reality of the kids who make the music and who are actually living in those very environments that were designed for by architects. So here you see the juxtaposition, and here's a short clip. And interestingly enough, most people were actually looking at the videos, right? So they weren't so much interested in in the formal architecture but there were some pretty amazing buildings. So in the backdrop of this video, there's the Barbican in London, for example, and this is Skepta, and with his crew kind of occupying that space and literally claiming it, you know, putting his flag there. And so we did that, which I don't think would have been possible or conceivable if I didn't have this trouw experience and this encounter with my invisible friend. So fast forward to the now, and not far from here, across the border in the real America, in Cambridge, near Boston, where I am a fellow at the Graduate School of Design at Harvard. Maybe some of you have studied there or been there. This is the building, which is your typical late 60s, 70s brutalist, modernist architecture, for which I think Boston is known for, the City Hall being a great example of that. So there I am, coming from this exciting few years, you know, being with human beings, being with people like Olaf, you know, using space and not so much thinking about it. And then all of a sudden being at a school where everything is intellectualized and internalized and conceptualized. And it felt like a step back. So, and I'm still there wondering, like, where do I fit in? And is this the way to go? Or should someone introduce a new curriculum here? Anyway, I'm not going to bother you with that. I just want to show my new friends. I will mention them since it's about friends, right? So Andrea is actually my roommate who's from Vancouver, who used to be city councillor, deputy mayor of Vancouver. Washington from Rio de Janeiro. Stephen, originally from Chicago, moving to Barcelona. Katie, Boston, myself. Gina, another roommate who is flatmate, who is from Louisville, Kentucky. And I hope to visit it soon. And then Maria is there from LA, and Mike from Costa Rica, and Bryna from New York is not on the photo. And just this experience, so like coming from, like, let's say the club scene where you meet new people, but in a way you're all on the same page, you're all from the same kind of background, you share a lot of interest, and then to be thrown into the GSD and to spend so much time with this amazing bunch of people from all around the world, and you really have to rethink again yourself and find a language to communicate. So it has been very powerful. One of the first things we did, or a few of us did, was go on a trip to St. Louis, the place of Pruitt-Igoe. For those of you who don't know, this legendary, it's like the poster child of failed architecture. Conceived in the 50s, built in the 50s, and shortly after it fell into disrepair and it was demolished only 15 or 20 years later. And definitely not necessarily because of the architecture, and certainly not because of the people living there, but because of lack of money for maintenance, lack of everything basically. So we went there. Here you see the literal downfall, the demolition. We went there and they actually kept the rubble. It's not redeveloped yet. And then there's a big fence around it and we had to crawl in. And in this world that I entered, I actually found my new friend, my latest friend. So come with me and I hope to be able to show you. So we walked, you see the original asphalt still there. So imagine those massive high-rises would be standing here in what is now a forest. Bob Hansman is the expert. He showed us around. He's been spending his entire life. He was there when the buildings were still up. So he showed us around as a real urban explorer. And we went in there with Harvard students. Just imagine studying at the most prestigious architecture school, allegedly, in the world, and being dropped in a forest and then having to think of the past of that place and what the potential future could be. So it was super powerful. And for a large part, for me personally, it was about something very specific, namely the trees. it's really something that struck me, because I've been so obsessed with concrete, spending so much time in being from a country where there are hardly any trees left, to be in this surrounding that was once occupied by buildings that are so legendary, and they're kind of digested by nature, that's kind of striking back and swallowing it up. So that was incredible. It was really a powerful moment. So the power of nature, trees as beings almost, as entities that you so easily overlook, but that are so close by. When you walk down the street, probably there are more trees around you that have kind of the same bodily presence as human beings. So I had this epiphany there. Like, I have to start looking for trees. What's happening to trees? Maybe they can tell me something about what's happening within architecture, how we are treating our world. When I came back, I literally stumbled upon the roots of this tree here that literally is swallowing up bricks. Incredibly powerful. So from then on, I've been looking at trees, looking for trees, and trying to understand what's happening to them. And sadly enough, they're very badly treated. I mean, they're exposed to all kinds of toxics and pollution. These are amazing trees in Boston. They're, artificially recreated and used as some sort of interior decoration. I saw this in Baltimore. They're almost used as like test animals. This is Harvard Forest, where they're doing these experiments with trees to kind of optimize tree growth for forestry, for example. And in general, their space is so limited in cities nowadays. They're really put away in a corner. And I got upset. It really hit me, and I thought, okay, I might as well spend my time here maybe looking at trees and trying to come up with the reason why we should be more careful about them. So I started this super naive blog, which I called Archipocene, which tries to look at the effect of architecture on the natural environment. And trees play an important role in writing that story or that history. So these are from various posts, just a quick timeline, and you're familiar with this, but just to share some of my obsession and also to introduce you to the potential friends that they might become for all of us. So they've been chopped down. I was flying over your magnificent country, and I noticed deforestation seems to be a thing around here as well. But it all started obviously in the 18th, 19th century, where on a massive scale, vast parts of the states were literally just chopped down and brought downstream to the major cities, so Chicago's here, to be turned into construction material. So if you drive, I haven't been outside the city here, but if you drive outside of Boston, almost all the houses are still made of wood. Or put on display, almost like there's an eerie link between like the world fairs and how people were put on display, and I know how in a certain period we dealt with nature is kind of astonishing to me. Up to the point where now we lost everything in certain places. So this is New York now versus some sort of visualization of what it might have looked like just 3 centuries ago, before the Dutch actually arrived and started chopping down trees, right? So, and then again, I'm living in this fairy tale-ish environment called Cambridge, with these magnificent monumental trees all around me. So again, I thought, okay, I shouldn't be too upset, too depressed. There should be hope. So I started looking around again for examples where humans and trees are actually managed to coexist. So this was just on my way here. I captured this moment where someone put like an iron pole just to let the tree lean against it so it would stay up. I think it's beautiful. Or this, just to make this little exception in the fence, just to let the tree be. I think it's already something, right? Seeing where we all came from. Or this, building kind of putting the tree at the center of a domestic space. I think it's also super great. This is my daughter. She's, I mean, not a friend formally, but she's wonderful, and she's having a great time throwing leaves around. And then I spent time, and I took a class at the Arboretum of Harvard, and there we really started looking at trees as environments in and of themselves. So not as like something detached from you, but something that wraps itself around you. And that, again, was quite powerful. And there were actually trees there where you could walk up to and you know, kind of inject yourself into, and then you would look up and you would have this magnificent view of the sky, and you would really be absorbed by this incredible ecosystem. So there I was, you know, kind of having moved away from my friends back in Amsterdam, all of a sudden trying to become friends with trees. And for some reason I had to think of Tarkovsky, and the famous Russian filmmaker, and there's this funny short video online where he's pondering over what the meaning of life could be. And one of the things he said is, you have to learn to love solitude. You have to kind of come to your senses and you withdraw from the world and find some truth inside of yourself, which for me is kind of hard. So I took that to heart, and I thought, okay, maybe I should consider myself as a friend. So for a while I kind of locked myself up in my room, and I started reading lots of books, and this is just the pile that is on my table right now. Most of them by female feminist writers, and almost all of them talk about working together, you know, decentering the human, thinking about things like multi-species entanglements, thinking in larger ecosystems. Or Bruno Latour, who came by at the GSD, who talks about we have to get down to earth, we have to kind of re-root ourselves. So some of the people I met in that period, Rosie Beraidotti, I'm gonna skip, she talks about some of those same issues. This is Bruno Latour, we had a chance to do an interview with him. So I kind of connected to trees, I connected to myself, and then it was time to go out again and engage with the world. And luckily I found my newly made friend being with me. So this is Andrea from Vancouver, who I showed earlier, who also gave me the text to acknowledge the people on the land here. And we went on a road trip to document some of the traces of indigenous habitation in the Boston area. That was amazing. And we looked at a lot of trees and really tried to understand their character, and because they, in a way, predate us, human beings, but they're also more likely to outlive us. We went to Savannah in the south. If you ever get a chance, go. It's incredible for so many reasons, but for me, most importantly, the trees, again. How it's this almost, it's almost like walking into a cloud. You know, everywhere there are trees and they're waving in the wind. And here's a video I took of one magnificent oak which has Spanish moss all around it. And they kind of feed off each other. So there's a symbiosis going on between the two of them. And it made me realize that maybe it's not about the trees, and maybe I should not become friends with trees. Maybe it's about learning from them, in trying to incorporate some of the logic and some of the beauty and some of the intelligence that is in animal and plant life, and bring that back to architecture. And talk to my architect friends, because the question you asked, like what would you recommend, who would you ask your architect friend to talk to? Because if you look at architects, by and large, still, unfortunately, their way, our way, let's make this personal. I think I'm so complicit by now that I'm part of it. I think we still think of architecture as something that is detached from nature. And at the same time, we get inspiration from it, but then we end up making this, right? Or we get inspiration from this and we make this. And if you just start thinking about the amount of concrete that was poured into this building to make it so strong that it could hold just a few tiny trees, and how many years it will take for those poor trees to absorb the CO2 that was emitted by the pouring of the concrete. It's just absurd. It's perverse almost. So nature is on people's minds, but I think for the wrong reason. So if I would have to advise or connect my architect friends or myself to someone, it would be a non-architect for sure. Just a few more examples. You probably know these. So yeah, let's create a community, let's create a circle where people can communicate, let's position ourselves in nature, and then you make this. So, almost at the end, going back to Trouw, where it all started for field architecture, for me personally, where I got inspiration, fuel that kept me going until I hit a wall that was demolished in St. Louis with the demolition of Pruitt-Igoe, looking for alternatives, where to go, immersing myself in nature, talking to trees, spending time with trees, finding new friends to get an understanding, and then being confronted with the question, who should architects talk to? And I thought about it for a long time, and it's a difficult one, and I'm really curious what the other speakers will come up with, but I thought, let's go full circle. I think it makes sense to go back to the guy who for me, started this whole adventure, which is Olaf. Again, there he is. Because interestingly enough, while I was on my way to Harvard, he and his wife, Mirla Klein, decided to go hiking and to go traveling along the coastline of the United States and to find a place where they could resettle, where they could build a new life. And they ended up in Chile, in the Andes. And they're working on an artist residency there right now, where they're inviting architects, designers, and artists to come and join them to learn from the forest and learn from the indigenous people that are actually living in that environment. And I think with Olaf, there's a growing movement, a group of people who are kind of breaking away from the mold and deciding to do things differently. And I don't say you have to, escape cities, but I think you can reposition and you can realign yourself with the natural environment. I think this is a beautiful example. So it would be wonderful, I think, if you would have a chance one day to go and visit them or be inspired and maybe start something similar. So they're at the other end of the world, so maybe it's not recommended to go there because you need to fly. But they're doing amazing work. Again, looking at trees, getting inspiration from them, but also looking at the indigenous people that are surrounding them, that are in a way have the key to this knowledge and this understanding. And instead of kind of going around them, circumventing these ancient traditions and knowledge, they tap into it, they work with them, they support them. Because they, I guess, need our support. And I know that in this country there's a lot going on around indigenous people, and as Andrea was mentioning, it's something I'm trying to learn about, not only to support them, but also definitely something that I want to learn from them. So maybe to finish off, maybe you already have your friend that can show you the way and that has aligned itself in a way with indigenous people. I think maybe it's better to go straight to the source and hold on to the things that are so precious and that we so often ignore. I think what I try to do is also to move away from this idea that it's all about individualism and that it's about singular human beings that are in control of their lives and their destiny and of their designs. So maybe indirectly, by introducing the tree, obviously, I hope you as a metaphor to think differently about our environment and kind of to not put ourselves always at the center, I hope you start thinking about creating new alliances that go beyond your colleagues and your peers, right? So in that sense, I think I did answer the question, but maybe not in the very concrete sense of mentioning one architect. And I did introduce you to one architect who was part of this little discussion that we had in this exhibition, which talked about appropriation of space in the city, Nanne de Rue, because he's a good friend of field architecture. Interestingly enough, he drives, I can tell because everyone knows it, he drives around in a Porsche. He just built his own Mysian villa on top of a building in Rotterdam. He uses marble. He likes to talk about the new luxury. So he has this deep understanding of the value of luxury as a thing that kind of elevates people. So in many ways, he's the kind of architect that we're very critical of. At the same time, he is attracted by us and the other way around. So I think he's also a developer, by the way. So he became friends with developers and in the end decided to become a developer himself. So he's developing his own buildings, which I find super intriguing. So he goes beyond, he's also a designer, he takes that very seriously, right? So his buildings are beautifully done, they're like a real value for the city, but I think he's willing to open up and to incorporate a new understanding of what an architect can be, but I do think that this whole natural environment thing is something that is completely off his radar at the moment. So I would love to spend more time. I've had him as a guest in public programs and we've been discussing books, etc. But I think it's good, like seriously, Olaf, they're out in the forest in the south of Chile setting up such a thing. I think it's a brave thing to do, and I think it's a huge opportunity for people who are focused on urban environments to maybe sometimes, get away from that and to, go live with other species. So I would love to bring him there. I think it would be wonderful for him and the profession because in a way he can also be a role model because he's so versatile.